Previously on Trippy Telly. The really tricky part is going to be making this shirt into her like ruched crop top. And yeah, it'll be, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, I know where I need to be, but I just need to break it up into steps and just take it one step at a time. So here we go. And now the conclusion. So I knew that the first thing I had to do was remove the sleeves and undo the stitching on any edges that I needed to be remaking. So I went ahead and did that. Since then I have bought a seam ripper, which I highly recommend because that makes it so much easier. But once you undo one side, if you can find the right balance, you can just pull the thread from the other side, and then it becomes really, really easy to remove that seam. So then I was able to kind of get those sleeves off a lot easier. And then I knew that the next step would be to take off that collar. So I went ahead and started working on that, as well as undoing the seams at the top of the shoulders and around the button panels. I wanted to make sure that I had as much fabric to work with as possible and that I was wasting as little fabric as possible. So I just cut that off as close to the buttons as I could. Since I had never done anything like this before, I really wanted to make sure I was saving as much fabric as possible in the actual garment, just in case. And then I cut out that V neckline to create the general shape of Teyla's shirt. Luckily, her shirt is very forgiving. It was a very forgiving one to learn how to sew on. Because it is kind of, as nice as it is kind of a, has kind of a tribal element to it, so it doesn't need to be super polished, so it was very forgiving. Went ahead and pinned down the center seam, and then around the neckline as well, and just pinned everything up to get a general idea of the shirt, and tried it on to make sure that it was going to fit properly. I did realize that the neckline was not deep enough, so I went ahead and took out one pin and repinned that where I wanted it to be. Always make sure that you double check which side is outwards and which side is the inside of the shirt. I ran into that mistake more than once. Then I just did a simple straight stitch down the middle, and this will create the ruching effect. And when you do this, you want a little bit more length in your stitches. If you want bigger ruches, you're going to need longer stitches. And if you want smaller ruching, then you're going to need smaller stitches. But if you get too small, then it's not going to ruche very easily, and the thread could break when you're trying to ruche the fabric. I really recommend having a spare piece of the fabric that you're working with to test out different lengths and widths and different stitches on. This was very, very helpful throughout this entire process, because all of those variables, the type of fabric and the variations to the stitching, will all make big differences in the end. So sewing down that center seam and around the neckline as well, just to hem everything. And sew that middle back together. And then there was the moment of ruche. Yes, if you follow my Instagram, you know that I'm using that joke again, but I can't help myself. I was super excited to actually be able to do this. This is the first time I've ever done this, and it was so cool just to be able to like move it and ruche it. And then I realized I had made a mistake. And I did not backstitch at the top, which is where you stitch forward and then you hit reverse and stitch back over it and go forward again, and this just holds the ends of your seams in place. So I had to go back and do that all over again. And then I was able to ruche it freely while having that very secured back stitch at the top. And then you just hold one of the threads on the bottom and then pull the fabric up. One thread will be long and the other one will be ruching with the fabric or over the fabric. And then I had to make sure I finished taking out the hems on the bottoms of the shirts. Hems and sides. And I just wanted to make sure again that I gave myself as much fabric to work with as possible. And also that I didn't have any other stitching that came with the shirt that I would be sewing over and creating weird lumps and bumps as I sewed over it myself. So then was the princess seams, and princess seams are literally just where you have these seams that curve around and to a woman's body type. It literally just curves over the high point of the breasts and then down from there straight, and it just creates a silhouette and a more structured garment that contours to the female body a lot better. And I used just cotton twine, one that I thought matched the thickness of pictures I had seen of Teyla's shirt. And I just pinned those straight down into place and kind of lined them up and got them where I wanted. And then I used a hem tape over the tops of those and very carefully hemmed on or pinned on either side of the hem tape all the way down the string, taking the needles out of, or the pins out of the twine as I pinned the hem tape over the top of them. And I just had to, I kind of moved the twine out of place a little bit on either side as I pinned down the sides, because if you sew into those twine pieces at all while you're sewing down the hem tape, then it's not going to ruche. It's going to get stuck where that sewing happened. And I could have just done straight lines sewing like I did with the middle seam, but one, it didn't seem to match her shirt exactly, and two, I was also concerned with this flat fabric that creating that kind of a seam where there really wasn't one, and just the shape of it, that it would kind of create some weird lumps and bumps. That's what I was afraid of. So I wanted to have an extra piece inside of it that was free moving inside of the fabric, so that I could move the fabric very easily around it and kind of position it how I wanted. Then it was back to the sewing machine and very tediously sewing either side of the hem tape onto the shirt, making sure that I did not sew any part of the twine. This was very tedious, I will admit, but very worth it, because in the end it made it a very sturdy, secure, and easy to maneuver ruching kind of casing. And I went ahead and gave it a try just to make sure it would work, because honestly this was all theory or hypothesis until this moment. And then it was just the other side. So after all of that was finished, I went ahead and had fun kind of ruching everything into place how I wanted it, just to see how it would work and how it would look in the end. And I kind of got those ruches lined up how I would want them and cut off any of the excess thread. It is so satisfying watching ruching, especially in fast forward. It's so satisfying to do too. So it was finding the right thread and then being able to pull up, getting everything into place. And when I got the shirt, I really made sure that I got one that would have been kind of oversized and long on me. There were some other ones that the fabric might have worked, but they were more cropped, and I knew that when I ruched it, I would cut off a lot of the length. So if you're doing this, definitely recommend getting a oversized, longer shirt. So this is where we pinned the sides, and I wore this as my mom pinned it, and I told her pin it to my ribs because it needed to be skin tight. And then I marked it with chalk just in case during this whole process I needed to undo them again. And I hemmed the bottom at a cropped length that I thought would work. And I left the music in this section because funnily enough, my mom was actually watching Stargate Atlantis while I was working on this, and I just thought that was kind of funny. So this is when I realized that the neckline was not correct. It didn't line up properly, so I had to undo that center seam and that ruching in the center and take that all out again, which was frustrating, but this kind of stuff happens. So then I wanted to make sure that I pinned it back into place where I needed it to be. I noticed that it was actually, when I put it on, for some reason the V-cut was actually way too high. So I needed it to be lower. And that's why I had to go in and repin it. And then pin down the center seam again. And I did actually put pins in these ruched parts just to hold that ruching in place, since I had gotten it where I wanted it to be. So I wanted those to just stay in place while I worked with the center seam. I'll tell you right now though, in the end I did have to take out those princess seam ruches though, just to make sure that when I sewed it, that it was completely flat in the middle and I wasn't going to create any bunching. But for the intents of pinning this middle seam together again, I just, that's what I did. And now I know better. So then it was deciding where I wanted that V to be created while still creating that kind of asymmetrical neckline folds that she has in her top. I did have a print out of her shirt, a picture of her, as a reference photo for this entire process, which I found very, very helpful. But as you can see, I made that V much, much deeper. And then I just wanted to lay out where those split rings were going to go. I think these were just slightly too big, but I was happy to just be able to use those. I think that was totally fine. And I was very happy with them in the end. But I just wanted to see what it would look like because I was getting so excited that it was starting to take shape. So I sewed down that middle seam again. And as you can see, I did have to take out those ruches just to make sure that my sewing was completely flat to avoid any mishaps. And I am actually sewing the hem on here as well. I will tell you though, with the V-cut, it actually ended up being way too low. So I don't know why I struggled so much with attaining the right cut for that. But what I ended up having to do was just take a spare piece of fabric, cut it into a V shape, or a triangle actually, and then I did a ruching down the center of it, and then I just sewed that in into the top of the shirt and just created a little like inlay. Because it's the same fabric, it blended in well enough, but that was kind of frustrating. Once I cut that fabric and went too far, it was kind of undoable. So then again, I ruched all of it back into place and laid it out how I wanted it to look, using her reference photo as a reference. Again, this is just so satisfying to watch. And cropping it. So this is creating the bottom of the shirt, the actual crop of the shirt. And I just laid it out and lined up everything in place. You can see I used chalk to figure out where the bottom of that shirt was going to lay. And this might be obvious to some people. It might not be. I know when you get into a project, sometimes you can get so focused on it that you have trouble seeing the bigger picture. So the obvious thing that may or may not be so obvious is that because there's ruching on the front but the back is flat, the reason I had to undo those pins that my mom put in on the sides were so that I could do the ruching and sew the ruched sides first, and then it would be sewing the front panel to the back panel. So this is hemming, and making sure and cutting off the extra thread, and then sewing the ruched sides. And then once again, I wanted to see what the rings looked like. I wanted to start to be able to envision the project, and I think that's something that's really important. I don't know about you, but for me, when I get towards the end of a project, sometimes I can get a little bit of a burnout. I'm super excited to see it finished, but I also kind of start losing energy. And so I think a helpful tip is just to like put on those extra details, even if it's only temporary. Even if you're just laying them on there, just get an idea of what it's going to look like. And sometimes that can give you the extra motivated boost to keep going. So I just lined those up like how I thought that they would look, using her reference picture again. And I wanted to see what the threading of the leather strap was. I believe I just got these rings off of Amazon, and then the leather strapping I got from Joann's. So it was actually pretty complicated to figure out how she laced this, and I made a big deal about making sure you couldn't see where it was tied at the bottom. But in watching the TV show, because I like things to be as accurate as possible, and I just like getting a feel for the character again, found out that she actually just had it like tied outside of her shirt. So it was very casual. That was me being too much of a perfectionist again. So I went ahead and pinned those sides back to where we had them with the chalk lined up again. And then it was trying to figure out how the heck to put in an invisible zipper. I've never put in a zipper in my life. I was terrified. I'm really, you can see I'm so confused, and I'm just trying to figure out how this is supposed to work. I knew that it had to taper down to my waist, so I couldn't have the zipper at the top of the shirt like they recommend usually. Because it wasn't just like slipping into the shirt and allowing more room at the rib cage. This shirt has no stretch to it, and the only way it's going to taper fit to my waist is if I can zip it like down onto my waist, and still be able to have it fit over my head and shoulders. So then it was pinning that into place upside down with the zipper at the bottom. And in the end, I did fold those little tags of the zipper at the bottom. You can see those sticking out down there. I did fold those up and just kind of sew over them to hold them into place. Also, they didn't have any purple zippers at the store, so I got blue. But it's an invisible zipper, so I was like, if I do it right, it's not gonna matter, right? And then I was really super excited to see like how the shirt was going to work, and I made sure that the zipper would open and close before I did this. And then it was just sewing it into place. I have no idea. You can see me backstitching there actually, but I have no idea what my family was watching. Some kind of cartoon or something, but It sounds real cute. So I just made sure the side seams and the zipper were all sewn into place nicely. So this is the final shirt. It's all finished, and this is how it turned out. I am super happy with it, especially considering this is my first official sewing project. Remaking this shirt definitely had some benefits, but I can see where some items of clothing would actually be able to be easier made from scratch rather than remaking an item of clothing. So I've learned a lot on this journey, and I'm only showing the shirt because the rest of the stuff was literally just like stuff with very minimal accessories added to them, and like the shoes I just got from ThreadUp. So it was a very easy cosplay. I knew that the shirt would be the only thing that I was really going to be working a lot on. So that's the only part of Teyla's first cosplay of sewing that I'm sharing with you guys. So I hope that it was helpful and entertaining, and that you had a good time. So thank you so much for being here, and it means a lot to me that you're joining me on this journey, not only learning how to create these items, but also in this cosplay journey for me. I know it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're just barely scratching the surface and just barely starting. So thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to sharing more of my life with you in the future.